"You're playing like a man with something to prove," Mrs. Brooks observed as Marcus's fingers danced across the cello strings. But could this talented black teenager, haunted by a cruel teacher's abuse that left him with chronic back pain, overcome the elite music professor determined to humiliate him? When Professor Harrington forced Marcus to play a cello in front of the entire class just to mock him, he never imagined what would happen next. "Music lives in you," Mrs. Brooks had whispered, "not in your fingers." But would her secret lessons be enough when Marcus faced his tormentor on the competition stage? Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Marcus Johnson winced as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. At 15, he shouldn't have to worry about chronic pain, but the incident last year had changed everything. Standing by his locker, he watched as other students rushed past, their carefree movements a constant reminder of what he'd lost. "You good, man?" Jamal Robinson, his best friend since 3rd grade, appeared beside him. "Same as always," Marcus replied, forcing a smile. "Back's acting up again." The hallways of Westside High School emptied as the final bell rang. Marcus sighed, knowing he'd be late for dinner again. Today, he had stayed behind to listen to the school orchestra practice. Music had always been his escape, even if he couldn't afford lessons himself. "Why do you torture yourself watching them play?" Jamal asked as they walked toward the bus stop. "You know your mom can't afford those fancy instruments." Marcus shrugged. "Just because I can't play doesn't mean I can't listen." At home, his grandmother Pearl was stirring a pot of her famous gumbo. The small apartment smelled of spices and comfort. "There's my musician," she smiled, using the nickname she'd given him years ago when she caught him creating melodies by tapping on kitchen pots. "Not a musician, Grandma. Just a kid who likes music." "Music lives in your soul, boy. Always has." She pointed her wooden spoon at him. "Your grandfather was the same way." His mother, Dr. Elaine Johnson, worked double shifts at Metro General Hospital. Despite her medical degree, the mountain of student loans and raising 2 children alone meant they still struggled financially. Later that night, Marcus lay in bed, unable to find a comfortable position for his aching back. The memory of Ms. Stevens' rage flooded back. "Stand up straight when I'm talking to you," she had screamed that day in English class. When he'd shifted in his seat, trying to maintain eye contact, she'd accused him of disrespect. What happened next was still a blur. He remembered her pulling him by his collar, the wooden paddle she kept in her desk, and the humiliating punishment in front of the entire class. 3 strikes that had left more than physical scars. The back specialist had explained the damage to his mother in clinical terms: contusion to the lower spinal muscles, chronic inflammation, possible nerve damage. What the doctor couldn't explain was why a teacher would hit a student with such force, or why the school board had merely transferred Ms. Stevens to another district rather than firing her. "It's not fair," his little sister Lydia had declared when she overheard their mother crying on the phone with the lawyer who had ultimately advised them to accept the small settlement. "No," Marcus thought as he finally drifted to sleep with music playing softly in his earbuds. "It wasn't fair at all." "You can't be serious." Marcus stared at the letter his mother had just handed him over breakfast. "Hillcrest Academy. That's where all the rich kids go." Dr. Elaine Johnson smiled tiredly, the dark circles under her eyes testament to her overnight shift. "And now you'll go there too. Full scholarship, Marcus. Their music program is the best in the state." "But I don't even play an instrument," he protested. "The scholarship is academic," his mother explained. "But I told them about your love for music. They have an orchestra that accepts beginners." The thought of starting over at a new school was terrifying, but the opportunity was too good to refuse. Still, as Marcus stood at the imposing gates of Hillcrest Academy the following Monday, he felt like an imposter. The campus resembled a small college more than a high school, with its manicured lawns and brick buildings. Students arrived in luxury cars, their casual conversations peppered with references to summer homes and European vacations. You must be Johnson. The principal, Mr. Thompson, barely looked up from his computer when Marcus was shown into his office. Your test scores are surprising. We rarely accept transfers, especially from. He paused, schools like Westside. The emphasis on the word made Marcus's skin crawl. He knew what Mr. Thompson was really saying. Your schedule. The principal slid a paper across his desk. Don't make me regret this exception. Marcus's first classes were a blur of new faces and subtle scrutiny. By lunchtime, he felt every stare, heard every whispered comment. He texted Jamal, "These kids have summer as a verb." After lunch came music appreciation with Professor Richard Harrington. The classroom was unlike anything at Westside, a miniature concert hall with tiered seating and actual instruments displayed around the room. "Ah, our new arrival." Professor Harrington's voice cut through the chatter as Marcus entered. The professor was tall and thin, with silver hair and an expression of perpetual distaste. "Mr. Johnson, I presume?" Marcus nodded, suddenly aware of every eye in the room. "Well, don't just stand there. Take a seat." Marcus hesitated, scanning the room for an empty chair. His back had been particularly painful today, the stress of the new environment aggravating his condition. "Sir, Is it possible for me to stand?" "My back." "Stand. This isn't a bus stop, young man. This is a prestigious music program. We sit. We observe proper posture. We respect tradition." A few students snickered. Among them, Marcus noticed a boy and girl who radiated privilege, Jason Reynolds and Elizabeth Parker, as he would later learn, children of the school's most generous donors. "I have a medical condition," Marcus explained quietly. "And I have a classroom to run," Professor Harrington replied dismissively. "If you can't follow simple instructions, perhaps Hillcrest isn't the right place for you after all." Reluctantly, Marcus lowered himself into the nearest seat, pain shooting up his spine as he did so. He wouldn't cry. Not here. Not now. "Now," Professor Harrington continued, "before we were interrupted, we were discussing the upcoming concert series." As the professor turned to write on the board, Jason leaned over to whisper, "Nobody wants your kind here anyway. Won't last a week." Marcus gripped the edge of his desk, his mother's words echoing in his mind, "This is your chance for something better." But as pain radiated through his back and whispers circulated around him, Marcus wondered if better existed for someone like him. The next day, Marcus arrived at Professor Harrington's class early, hoping to explain his situation properly. The classroom was empty except for the professor, who was arranging sheet music on his stand. "Professor Harrington, could I speak with you about my medical condition?" The professor barely glanced up. "What about it?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I have chronic pain from a spinal injury. Sitting for long periods is difficult for me. I have documentation from my doctor if." "Mr. Johnson," Professor Harrington interrupted, "I've been teaching music for 30 years. I've seen every excuse imaginable from students who wish to be treated differently. This institution maintains certain standards. If you cannot meet them, perhaps you should reconsider your enrollment." "But it's not an excuse," Marcus protested, pulling out the medical report his mother had prepared. "I can participate in everything else. I just need to stand occasionally." Professor Harrington's eyes narrowed. "Put that away. I'm not interested in your paperwork. My classroom, my rules." Students began filing in, including Jason and Elizabeth, who smirked when they saw Marcus. A quiet girl with auburn hair, Sarah Mitchell, according to the seating chart, gave him a small, sympathetic smile as she passed. "Take your seats, everyone," Professor Harrington announced. "Today we begin our exploration of stringed instruments." He gestured to several instruments arranged at the front of the room. These represent the pinnacle of musical achievement. The violin, viola, cello, and bass require discipline, precision, and cultural appreciation that develops over generations. His gaze settled on Marcus, who had reluctantly taken a seat but couldn't help shifting uncomfortably every few minutes. "Mr. Johnson, is there a problem?" You seem incapable of sitting still. The room fell silent. Marcus felt his face grow hot. I'm sorry, sir. It's my back. Yes, your condition. The professor made air quotes with his fingers. Several students laughed. Since sitting properly appears to be beyond your capabilities, perhaps you prefer to stand after all? Yes, sir. Thank you, Marcus said, relieved as he carefully stood. But Professor Harrington wasn't finished. In fact, since you're now standing, you can make yourself useful. Come to the front. Confused but hopeful, Marcus made his way to the front of the classroom. Take the cello, Professor Harrington instructed, pointing to the largest instrument. Sir, I don't know how to play. That much is obvious, the professor interrupted, triggering another wave of laughter. But since you insist on being an exception to every rule, show us how your special circumstances translate to musical ability. Marcus stood frozen, mortification washing over him as he realized what was happening. Pick it up, Professor Harrington insisted. Unless your condition prevents that as well. With trembling hands, Marcus awkwardly lifted the cello. It was heavier than he expected, and positioning it between his legs sent sharp pain through his back. The bow, Mr. Johnson. Or do we need a remedial lesson in identifying basic equipment? Jason Reynolds called out, maybe they don't have real instruments in his neighborhood, Professor. Elizabeth added, probably thinks it's some kind of fancy broom. The classroom erupted in laughter as Marcus fumbled with the bow, his face burning with humiliation. Play something, Professor Harrington demanded. Anything. Show us this musical appreciation you supposedly possess. Marcus drew the bow across the strings, producing a harsh, screeching sound that made several students cover their ears. Magnificent, Professor Harrington said sarcastically. Truly the sound of raw, untrained, what shall we call it? Talent seems generous. Tears threatened at the corners of Marcus's eyes as he tried again, producing only discordant noise. His back screamed in agony from the awkward posture. This, Professor Harrington announced to the class, is what happens when we lower our standards. When we admit students based on quotas rather than qualifications. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He wanted to disappear, to explain that he never claimed to be a musician, that he was here on academic merit, that his love for music didn't mean he could magically play an instrument he'd never touched. I think we've had enough demonstration for one day, Professor Harrington finally said. You may return the instrument to its stand, Mr. Johnson. Try not to damage it, it's worth more than your scholarship. As Marcus carefully placed the cello back, his hands shaking and back throbbing, he caught Sarah's eye. Her expression held no mockery, only quiet distress at what she had witnessed. The bell rang, and students began gathering their things. As they filed out, Marcus heard Jason say loudly, "Did you see his face? Priceless." Professor Harrington called after Marcus as he limped toward the door, "Mr. Johnson, I expect a proper seated posture tomorrow. Accommodation forms go through proper channels, not classroom disruptions." In the hallway, Marcus leaned against the wall, fighting back tears. His phone buzzed with a text from Jamal, "How's fancy school today?" Marcus couldn't bring himself to respond. The journey home felt eternal. Marcus stood on the bus, gripping the handrail as the vehicle lurched through traffic. Each jolt sent waves of pain through his back, but it was nothing compared to the ache in his chest. When he finally reached their apartment, he was relieved to find it empty. His mother was working, Grandma Pearl was at her church meeting, and Lydia was at after-school care. He didn't want them to see him like this. In his bedroom, Marcus finally let the tears come. They flowed silently at first, then erupted into gut-wrenching sobs that shook his narrow shoulders. The humiliation replayed in his mind on an endless loop, the screeching cello, the mocking laughter, Professor Harrington's cutting remarks. His phone buzzed relentlessly with messages from Jamal, "You alive?" Earth to Marcus. "Did those rich kids kidnap you?" "Seriously, man. Getting worried." Finally, Marcus replied, "Don't want to talk about it." But Jamal wouldn't be deterred. 10 minutes later, a knock on the apartment door announced his arrival. "You look like hell," Jamal said when Marcus opened the door. "Thanks," Marcus replied dryly, letting his friend in. In Marcus's room, Jamal listened in growing outrage as Marcus recounted the day's events. "That's straight-up discrimination. Your mom's a doctor, she should sue." Marcus shook his head. "We can't afford another lawsuit. The settlement for Miss Stevens barely covered my medical bills." He winced as he shifted position on his bed. "Besides, it would just make everything worse." "So you're just gonna let that racist jerk win?" "I don't know what to do," Marcus admitted. "If I quit, I'm proving him right. If I stay..." The sound of the front door interrupted them. Dr. Elaine Johnson called out, "Marcus. I'm home early. Dr. Sanderson covered my shift." One look at her son's face told Elaine everything she needed to know. What happened? After hearing the full story, she sat beside Marcus on the bed, careful not to jostle him. "Baby, I am so sorry." Her voice wavered. "I thought this would be a good opportunity for you." "It's not your fault, Mom." Later that evening, as Marcus picked at his dinner, Grandma Pearl studied him across the table. "You want to tell me why you're moving that food around instead of eating it?" Marcus summarized the day's events, trying to downplay the humiliation. Grandma Pearl's eyes flashed with anger, but her voice remained calm. "Let me tell you something about people like that, Professor. They're small inside. So small they have to make others feel smaller just to feel normal size themselves." "But he has all the power," Marcus said. "He can fail me, kick me out." "Power isn't always where it appears to be," she replied. "Sometimes, the strongest river starts as just a tiny stream." 10-year-old Lydia, who had been quietly listening, suddenly piped up, "I think you should learn to play for real and then show him how wrong he is." The simplicity of her suggestion hung in the air. Marcus opened his mouth to dismiss it, but then closed it again. What if he could learn? Not to please Professor Harrington, but to prove something to himself. That night, unable to sleep, Marcus searched online for "How to Learn Cello with No Money" and "Free Music Lessons." The results were discouraging, instruments were expensive, lessons even more so. As he finally drifted off, the mocking sound of his own clumsy attempt at playing echoed in his dreams, mingled with the laughter of his classmates and the sneering face of Professor Harrington. But beneath it all, a faint melody persisted. His melody. Waiting to be discovered. 3 days later, Marcus was helping Grandma Pearl carry groceries into their building when the elevator doors opened to reveal an elderly white woman struggling with several bags. "Let me help you with those, ma'am," Marcus offered automatically. Such a gentleman, the woman smiled, her eyes crinkling behind round glasses. "5th floor, apartment 5C. As they walked down the hall, she introduced herself. "I'm Eleanor Brooks. Been living here 30 years, even as the neighborhood changed around me." Marcus nodded politely, setting her bags down outside her door. "Would you like some lemonade? Freshly made this morning." Something about her kindness made Marcus accept despite his usual caution around strangers. Mrs. Brooks's apartment was unlike anything he'd expected. The modest living room was dominated by a beautiful wooden cabinet. But what caught Marcus's attention was the framed photograph on the wall, a much younger Mrs. Brooks in formal attire, seated with a cello. "You play?" he asked, surprised. "Played," she corrected. "For 43 years with the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra. First black woman in the string section." Marcus stared at her with newfound respect. "For real?" Mrs. Brooks chuckled. "For very real. Now, what has you walking like an old man when you're just a boy?" Her directness caught him off guard. Before he knew it, Marcus found himself telling her everything, about Ms. Stevens, his back injury, Hillcrest Academy, and Professor Harrington's humiliation. Mrs. Brooks listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "May I see?" she asked when he finished. Marcus hesitated, then turned and lifted his shirt slightly, revealing the scarred tissue where Ms. Stevens's paddle had struck with particular force. Mrs. Brooks made a sound between a gasp and a growl. That woman should be in jail, not teaching. She rose with surprising agility and walked to the wooden cabinet, unlocking it to reveal a stunning cello nestled in velvet. Giovanni Battista Guadagnini, 1748, she said, running her fingers lovingly over the wood. Haven't played her in years. These old hands. She flexed her fingers, showing slight deformities from arthritis. It's beautiful, Marcus whispered. Would you like to try it? Properly this time. Marcus stepped back. No, I'll just make that horrible noise again. Not with proper instruction, you won't. When Marcus returned home that evening, he was quiet but somehow lighter. Grandma Pearl noticed immediately. Met someone interesting, he said when she asked. Mrs. Brooks in 5C. She used to be a professional cellist. Eleanor Brooks? Grandma Pearl exclaimed. Lord, I remember when she made the front page of the Tribune. Your grandfather and I were so proud to see one of our own break that barrier. The following day at school, Sarah Mitchell approached Marcus as he stood outside the music room, dreading another class with Professor Harrington. I just wanted to say, what happened yesterday wasn't right, she said softly. Professor Harrington shouldn't have done that. Before Marcus could respond, Jason and Elizabeth approached. Slumming, Sarah. Jason sneered. Sarah straightened her shoulders. Actually, I was just giving Marcus my notes from yesterday. He's my lab partner in AP Biology. It was a lie, but it sent Jason and Elizabeth skulking away. Thank you, Marcus said. You know, Sarah said, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard, if you ever wanted to learn more about music theory, I have some books that might help. First, we need to address your posture, Mrs. Brooks said during their initial lesson. Your injury complicates things, but we'll find a position that works. It was Saturday afternoon, the first of what would become regular sessions in Mrs. Brooks's apartment. After experimenting with various positions, they discovered that Marcus could hold the cello comfortably if he sat on a specially modified chair Mrs. Brooks had used during her own recovery from a back injury years ago. Music and pain have been companions throughout history, she explained. Many great musicians performed through physical suffering. It's not the absence of pain that defines us, but what we create despite it. Marcus positioned his fingers carefully on the strings, following Mrs. Brooks's instructions. The first notes he produced were hesitant but clear, nothing like the screeching disaster in Professor Harrington's class. That's it, Mrs. Brooks encouraged. Feel how the instrument vibrates against your chest. That's the heart of the cello speaking to yours. Over the next few weeks, Marcus established a careful routine. After school, he would spend an hour with Mrs. Brooks before heading home to complete his homework. He told his mother and grandmother about the lessons, but swore them to secrecy. I don't want anyone at school to know, he insisted. Not yet. His progress was remarkable. Mrs. Brooks called it making up for lost time, but Marcus suspected it was more than that. When he played, the pain in his back seemed to recede, as if the music itself had healing properties. Your hands were made for this, Mrs. Brooks observed one afternoon as Marcus skillfully navigated a difficult passage. Like they've been waiting all these years to find their purpose. At school, Marcus continued to endure Professor Harrington's class, now standing at the back without protest. The professor's jabs continued, but Marcus found them easier to bear, knowing what awaited him after school. Sarah Mitchell had become an unexpected ally. True to her word, she had lent Marcus several books on music theory, which he devoured at night. Occasionally, they would meet in the library during lunch, Sarah explaining concepts Marcus found challenging. Why are you helping me? He asked her one day. Sarah considered the question. My grandfather was a sharecropper who taught himself to read music by candlelight after working 14-hour days. Professor Harrington thinks music belongs to people like him, but it doesn't. It belongs to anyone willing to listen, to learn, to feel. One afternoon, as Marcus practiced a particularly challenging piece, Mrs. Brooks suddenly held up her hand, signaling him to stop. "Play that passage again," she requested. "The one from measure 16. Marcus complied, concentrating on the difficult fingering. "Now close your eyes and play it again." He did, and the notes flowed even more smoothly. "You're playing from memory," Mrs. Brooks observed. "I guess I am," Marcus realized, surprised. "That's a rare gift," she said thoughtfully. "Does music play in your head when you're not practicing?" Marcus nodded. "All the time. Even before I started learning. I'd hear orchestras playing in my mind." Mrs. Brooks's eyes widened. "Marcus, that's not just an interest in music. That's a calling." Meanwhile, at Hillcrest, Professor Harrington had noticed Marcus's changing demeanor. The boy no longer seemed affected by his barbs, which only irritated the professor more. "Mr. Johnson," he called out during class one day, "since you insist on standing like a sentinel at the back of my classroom, perhaps you could explain to us the difference between staccato and legato?" Marcus, who had just been reading about this in one of Sarah's books, answered perfectly. Professor Harrington's eyes narrowed. "And the primary characteristic of the Baroque period?" Again, Marcus provided a correct response. "Been studying, have we?" the professor said coldly. "Trying to impress. It takes more than memorizing facts to understand music. It requires cultural context, historical appreciation, a certain heritage." Jason snickered. "Yeah, like rhythmic basketball dribbling is the same as Bach." "That's enough," Professor Harrington said, though his tone conveyed approval rather than reprimand. Elizabeth raised her hand. "Professor, shouldn't Johnson have to demonstrate his knowledge practically? Since he claims to understand music theory now." "An excellent suggestion," the professor smiled thinly. "What do you say, Mr. Johnson? Care for another demonstration? Perhaps you've magically learned to play since your last performance." Marcus felt a chill run through him. He wasn't ready to reveal what he had learned. "Not here. Not like this." "I'd rather not, sir," he said quietly. "As I suspected," Professor Harrington said dismissively. "All theory, no application. Typical." That evening, Marcus played with unusual intensity, his bow flying across the strings with barely contained emotion. "You're angry," Mrs. Brooks observed when he finished. "Music can transform anger into something beautiful, but only if you acknowledge it first." "He's never going to see me as anything but an outsider," Marcus said bitterly. "No matter what I learn, how hard I work." "Then why learn at all?" Mrs. Brooks challenged. "If it's to prove something to him, you've already lost." "Then why am I doing this?" Mrs. Brooks smiled gently. "That, my dear boy, is what you need to discover for yourself." The winter months brought increasing challenges. Professor Harrington seemed determined to make Marcus quit, assigning impossible research papers and calling on him constantly in class, always with the underlying implication that he didn't belong at Hillcrest. After a particularly brutal session where Marcus was forced to analyze a piece beyond his knowledge level, he finally convinced his mother to arrange a meeting with Mr. Thompson. "I've reviewed your concerns," the principal said, glancing between Marcus and Dr. Johnson, "but Professor Harrington has been with us for 20 years. His methods may be traditional, but they get results." "Traditional?" Dr. Johnson repeated incredulously. "Making my son stand in pain and publicly humiliating him is traditional?" "Mrs. Johnson, Dr. Johnson," she corrected firmly. "Dr. Johnson," the principal amended with a tight smile, "Professor Harrington maintains that your son's behavior has been disruptive. Refusing to sit properly, answering back. Because sitting causes him severe pain. I provided medical documentation. Which should have gone through proper channels, not been thrust upon a teacher without warning," Mr. Thompson countered. "Additionally, Professor Harrington is concerned that Marcus may be receiving outside help with his assignments, given the sudden improvement in his understanding of music theory." Marcus felt his face flush. "I've been studying hard." "So you say." Mr. Thompson's tone made it clear he didn't believe him. Perhaps Hillcrest isn't the right environment for you after all, Mr. Johnson. The academic pressure here is considerable, and not every student can handle it. You mean not every black student, Dr. Johnson said flatly. Mr. Thompson's expression hardened. I'd be careful with such accusations, Dr. Johnson. They could reflect poorly on your son's academic future. As they left the office, Marcus spotted a familiar face in the administration area, Ms. Victoria Stevens, his former teacher, engaged in friendly conversation with Professor Harrington. Mom, Marcus whispered urgently, that's her. That's Ms. Stevens. Dr. Johnson froze, her expression shifting from confusion to fury. What is she doing here? Before Marcus could stop her, his mother approached the pair. Ms. Stevens. What a surprise to see you here. Ms. Stevens turned, recognition dawning in her eyes. Dr. Johnson. You know each other? Professor Harrington interrupted, looking between them. Ms. Stevens used to teach at my son's previous school, Dr. Johnson said coldly. Before she was transferred for physically assaulting a student. My son, specifically. Professor Harrington's eyebrows rose. Victoria never mentioned that. Though I'm sure there must be some misunderstanding. We've been friends for years. She was quite helpful in pointing out students from West Side who might benefit from our outreach program. The implication struck Marcus like a physical blow. Ms. Stevens had recommended him for the scholarship, not to help him, but to set him up for failure. Richard, I can explain, Ms. Stevens began, but Dr. Johnson cut her off. No explanation needed. It's perfectly clear. She turned to Marcus. We're leaving. In the car, Marcus's mother gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. I want you to transfer out. Today. No, Marcus said, surprising himself. That's what they want. They set this up to make me fail, to prove I don't belong there. I won't give them the satisfaction. His mother sighed deeply. Marcus, it's not worth the pain, physical or emotional. If I leave now, they win. And not just against me, but against anyone else who might get a chance in the future. Dr. Johnson studied her son's determined expression. When did you get so grown? At home, Grandma Pearl listened to their account with uncharacteristic silence. Grandma? Marcus finally prompted. What do you think? I think, she said slowly, that sometimes God places the heaviest burdens on the strongest shoulders. She took Marcus's hand. But you don't have to carry it alone. That night, Marcus practiced with renewed purpose. Mrs. Brooks noticed immediately. You're playing like a man with something to prove, she observed. Marcus told her about Ms. Stevens's connection to Professor Harrington. So that's how it is, Mrs. Brooks mused. A conspiracy of mediocrity against excellence. Excellence. Marcus laughed bitterly. I've only been playing a few months. And progressing faster than any student I've ever taught, Mrs. Brooks countered. Marcus, I've been thinking. There's a young musicians competition in the spring. The Westover Foundation New Talent Showcase. You want me to compete? Marcus asked incredulously. Against kids who've been playing their whole lives? Against yourself, Mrs. Brooks corrected. To prove what's possible when talent meets determination. That weekend, Jason and Elizabeth cornered Marcus outside the school library. We know your dirty little secret, Elizabeth taunted. Marcus's heart raced. Had they discovered his lessons with Mrs. Brooks? My cousin works at the courthouse, Jason continued smugly. Told me all about your lawsuit. How you tried to shake down your old school with some fake injury claim. Relief washed over Marcus, followed quickly by anger. That's not what happened. Save it, Elizabeth sneered. Professor Harrington already knows. He's just waiting for the right moment to expose you to the whole school. As they walked away laughing, Marcus leaned against the wall, his back throbbing with familiar pain. But underneath the pain, something new was emerging, a fierce determination to prove them all wrong. Again, from the beginning, Mrs. Brooks instructed. And remember, the Bach suite isn't just about technical precision. It's about feeling. 5 months into their lessons, Marcus had progressed to pieces Mrs. Brooks said many of her conservatory students hadn't mastered after years of study. His fingers moved across the strings with growing confidence, drawing out notes that seemed to vibrate through his entire body. Better, Mrs. Brooks nodded when he finished. But you're still holding back. What are you afraid of? Before Marcus could answer, a knock interrupted them. Mrs. Brooks frowned. They were never disturbed during lesson time. Continue practicing, she said, rising to answer the door. Marcus returned to the passage, losing himself in the music. He barely registered the murmured conversation at the door or the soft footsteps entering the room. When he finally looked up, he found Mrs. Brooks standing with a middle-aged black woman he didn't recognize. The stranger's eyes were wide, her lips slightly parted in surprise. Marcus, this is Ms. Diana Williams, Mrs. Brooks introduced. She teaches at the community music school downtown. I'm sorry to interrupt, Ms. Williams said, but I heard you playing from the hallway. Eleanor, you didn't tell me your student was this advanced. Mrs. Brooks smiled mysteriously. I wanted you to hear for yourself. How long have you been playing? Ms. Williams asked Marcus. About 5 months, he admitted. Ms. Williams looked shocked. 5 months? That's impossible. I practice a lot, Marcus said self-consciously. It's not just practice, Ms. Williams insisted, turning to Mrs. Brooks. This is rare talent. Exceptional, even. Mrs. Brooks nodded. I thought so too. That's why I called you. Over tea, Ms. Williams explained that she wasn't just a teacher but also a talent scout for the prestigious Westover Foundation, which provided opportunities for exceptional young musicians from underprivileged backgrounds. Our director, Dr. William Carter, is always looking for students with unique potential, she explained. He's particularly interested in addressing the lack of diversity in classical music. Dr. Carter. Mrs. Brooks sounded impressed. The renowned cellist? The very same, Ms. Williams confirmed. He's in town next week for master classes. I'd like Marcus to audition for him. Marcus's heart raced. Audition? I'm not ready for that. You're more ready than you realize, Mrs. Brooks said firmly. Before Marcus could protest further, his phone buzzed. It was Jamal. Dude, where are you? We're supposed to meet Sarah at the library in 20. Marcus had completely forgotten their study session. After Ms. Williams left with a promise to arrange the audition, he rushed to meet his friends. Sarah was waiting outside the public library, textbooks clutched to her chest. There you are. I was getting worried. Sorry, Marcus apologized. Lost track of time. Jamal raised an eyebrow. With your mysterious music thing again? Man, when are you going to tell us what you're really doing after school? Marcus hesitated, then made a decision. Actually, I want to show you guys something. If you're free tomorrow after school. The next day, Marcus led his friends to Mrs. Brooks's apartment, nervous about revealing his secret. You've been taking cello lessons? Sarah asked, her eyes widening as she took in the beautiful instrument. This whole time. Playing, not just taking lessons, Mrs. Brooks corrected. Go on, Marcus. Show them. Positioning himself on the special chair, Marcus took a deep breath and began to play. He chose a piece he'd been perfecting for weeks, the prelude from Bach's Cello Suite No. 1. His eyes closed as he lost himself in the music, his body swaying slightly with each phrase. When he finished, the room was silent. He opened his eyes to find Jamal staring open-mouthed and Sarah with tears streaming down her face. That was. Jamal struggled for words. Man, I don't even know what to say. It was beautiful, Sarah whispered. Marcus, you have to let people hear this. You have to. I'm not ready, Marcus protested. And at school, with Professor Harrington. Forget that jerk, Jamal said fiercely. This isn't about him. This is about you. The following Wednesday, Marcus met Dr. William Carter. The famous cellist was imposing, tall and distinguished with salt and pepper hair and penetrating eyes that seemed to look through rather than at you. Play something, he instructed without preamble. Marcus began with the Bach piece he was most comfortable with, but Dr. Carter stopped him after just a few measures. Something else. Something that speaks to you personally. Taken aback, Marcus thought for a moment, then began a piece he'd been working on privately, a composition of his own, inspired by the melodies he heard in his head. Dr. Carter's expression changed as Marcus played, his professional detachment giving way to genuine interest. "You wrote that?" he asked when Marcus finished. Marcus nodded nervously. "It's unpolished," Dr. Carter said bluntly. "But there's something there. Something authentic." He turned to Ms. Williams. "He needs formal training. Immediately." "That's why we wanted you to hear him," she replied. "The showcase." "Not just the showcase," Dr. Carter interrupted. "I want him in my summer program at Eastman. Full scholarship." Marcus could hardly believe what he was hearing. "But there's a condition," Dr. Carter continued, fixing Marcus with an intense gaze. "I need to see how you perform under pressure. The Westover showcase is in 8 weeks. You'll play there, not just Bach, but your own composition as well." 8 weeks? Marcus's voice cracked. "But the other competitors have been preparing for months, years even." "They've been playing longer," Dr. Carter acknowledged. "But they're playing what's expected. You're playing what needs to be heard." As Marcus left the audition, his mind reeling, Sarah called with news that made his blood run cold. "Professor Harrington is one of the judges for the Westover showcase. And he knows you've entered." "He knows?" Marcus repeated, sinking onto a bench outside the community center where he'd met Dr. Carter. "How?" "The list of participants was posted on the music department bulletin board," Sarah explained. "I overheard him talking to Jason about it. He seemed angry." Of course he was angry, Marcus thought. Professor Harrington had spent months trying to drive him away from music, not encourage him toward it. That evening, Marcus shared the news with his family and Mrs. Brooks during an impromptu dinner at their apartment. "This competition could change everything," Marcus explained. "Dr. Carter said if I do well, he wants me in his summer program at Eastman. Full scholarship." "Eastman?" Dr. Johnson nearly dropped her fork. "Marcus, that's one of the top music schools in the country." "But Professor Harrington is one of the judges," Marcus continued. "He'll do anything to make sure I fail." "Not necessarily," Grandma Pearl interjected. "Remember what I told you about rivers and streams? That man may think he has power, but true talent can't be denied." "Mrs. Pearl is right," Mrs. Brooks agreed. "Besides, there are 5 judges. Harrington is just one vote." Over the next few weeks, Marcus's life became a blur of practice, homework, and increasingly painful physical therapy sessions. His back condition, aggravated by his intense practice schedule, threatened to derail his progress. "You need to rest," his mother insisted after finding him grimacing through scales at midnight. "I can't," Marcus replied, determination overriding the pain. "The other competitors have had years to prepare. I have weeks." As the showcase approached, even Sarah expressed concern. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she told him during one of their study sessions. "You're pale, you're losing weight." "I'm fine," Marcus insisted, though they both knew it wasn't true. 3 weeks before the competition, disaster struck. During a particularly intense practice session, Marcus felt something give in his lower back, a sharp, shooting pain that sent him collapsing to the floor of Mrs. Brooks's apartment. "Marcus!" Mrs. Brooks cried out, rushing to his side. The trip to the emergency room was a blur. Dr. Johnson met them there, her professional demeanor cracking when she saw her son's ashen face. "Muscle spasm," the ER doctor diagnosed after examining him. "Severe, but not permanent damage if he rests completely. No cello for at least 2 weeks." 2 weeks. Marcus repeated in horror. But the showcase is not worth permanent injury, his mother cut in firmly. Back home, confined to bed rest, Marcus fell into despair. It's over, he told Jamal when his friend visited. Even if I can play by then, I'll have lost crucial practice time. So practice differently, Jamal suggested. What does that mean? I don't know, man. Mental practice? Isn't that a thing? Like, visualize playing or whatever. The idea took root. Unable to hold his cello, Marcus began mental practice sessions, visualizing every note, every finger position, every bow movement. He listened obsessively to recordings, internalizing the tempo and dynamics of each piece. Mrs. Brooks visited daily, sometimes just sitting beside his bed humming passages they had been working on. The music lives in you, she reminded him. Not in your fingers. 1 week before the showcase, Marcus was finally cleared to play again, cautiously and with frequent breaks. His first session back with the cello revealed something unexpected. His mental practice had actually improved aspects of his playing. His interpretation was more nuanced, more emotional. You've been listening instead of just playing, Mrs. Brooks observed. Good. Now you can do both. As the day of the showcase approached, Marcus received an unexpected visit from Sarah. She arrived at his apartment clutching a folder. I've been doing reconnaissance, she explained, spreading out papers on his bed. These are the profiles of all the judges except Professor Harrington. Marcus scanned the information. How did you get this? I volunteered to help with the showcase administration, she replied with a small smile. These are their backgrounds, their preferences, everything you need to understand what they'll be looking for. The night before the showcase, Marcus couldn't sleep. Instead, he sat by his window, looking out at the city lights, the cello beside him like a silent companion. Are you nervous? Lydia asked, appearing in his doorway in her pajamas. Terrified, Marcus admitted. Remember when I was scared to ride my bike without training wheels, she asked, climbing onto his bed. You told me sometimes you have to fall to learn how to fly. Marcus smiled at the memory. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best, she replied, hugging him carefully to avoid hurting his back. The morning of the showcase dawned bright and clear. As Marcus carefully placed the cello in its borrowed case, his mother appeared in his doorway. I have something for you, she said, holding out a small velvet box. Inside was a pair of cufflinks, simple silver discs with musical notes etched on their surface. They were your grandfather's, she explained, her voice thick with emotion. He never got the chance to pursue his own musical dreams. He would be so proud to see you living yours. As they prepared to leave for the showcase, Grandma Pearl took his hands in hers. Remember, child. Music isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. With his cello on his back and his family beside him, Marcus took a deep breath and stepped toward his future, uncertain but unwavering. The Westover Foundation New Talent Showcase was held in the grand auditorium of the Fairmont Conservatory, a neo-Gothic building that had hosted some of the world's greatest musicians. Marcus had never seen anything like it, the soaring ceiling, the plush red seats, the polished wood stage gleaming under the lights. Backstage, the atmosphere was tense. 20 young musicians prepared their instruments, adjusted their formal attire, and paced nervously. Most were accompanied by parents who looked even more anxious than their children. Marcus Johnson. A clipboard-wielding coordinator approached. You're number 17. 17 out of 20. Nearly last. The long wait would be torturous. Marcus. His mother squeezed his hand. No matter what happens today, I know, Mom, he interrupted gently. You're proud of me just for being here. Damn right I am, she smiled, blinking back tears. As they arranged his music at his assigned preparation table, a familiar voice cut through the background noise. Well, well. If it isn't our scholarship student. Professor Harrington stood behind them, immaculate in a tailored suit, a judge's badge prominently displayed on his lapel. Beside him stood Jason and Elizabeth, both carrying instrument cases. "Professor," Marcus acknowledged stiffly. "I must admit, I was surprised to see your name on the participant list," Harrington continued. "Especially given your disastrous introduction to the cello in my classroom." "People can learn, Professor," Marcus replied evenly. "Some faster than others." Harrington's eyes narrowed at the implicit challenge. "Indeed. Though real musicians typically start their training in childhood, not a few months before a prestigious competition." "Dr. Johnson," the professor continued, turning to Marcus's mother with false civility, "I understand you're acquainted with my dear friend Victoria Stevens." "Unfortunately," Dr. Johnson replied coolly. "Such a shame about that misunderstanding at Westside," Harrington said. "Victoria was quite clear about what really happened. A troublesome student fabricating accusations to cover his own disruptive behavior." Marcus felt his face flush with anger. "That's not, Marcus." His mother laid a warning hand on his arm. "This isn't the place." "Listen to your mother, Mr. Johnson," Harrington smirked. "Emotional outbursts have no place in classical music. But then, some cultural backgrounds do tend toward the expressive." "Excuse me." A new voice joined the conversation. Ms. Diana Williams approached, her expression fierce. "I couldn't help overhearing. Professor Harrington, isn't there a rule about judges having contact with participants before the competition?" Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just wishing a student from our school good luck, Ms. Williams. No harm in that." "Then you should wish all your students luck equally," she replied pointedly, glancing at Jason and Elizabeth. "Unless you're showing preferential treatment." Harrington's jaw tightened. "I'll see you all at the judging table." He turned and walked away, Jason and Elizabeth trailing behind him. "Thank you," Dr. Johnson said to Ms. Williams. "Don't thank me yet," she replied grimly. "He's still a judge, and he clearly has it out for Marcus." As the competition began, Marcus tried to focus on his mental preparations rather than the exceptional performances echoing from the stage. Each young musician was introduced with their accolades: studying since age 3, winner of the junior division of the National String Competition, accepted to Juilliard's pre-college program. What would they say about him? Been playing for 6 months. When Jason performed, a technically flawless but emotionally vacant rendition of Vivaldi, Marcus could see Professor Harrington beaming from the judges' table, making excited notes on his scoring sheet. By the time Marcus's turn approached, his back was screaming in protest from the hours of sitting in the hard backstage chair. Standing to stretch, he came face to face with Ms. Stevens, who had apparently been watching from the wings. "I heard you entered," she said, her voice low. "Quite the development since our time together at Westside." "No thanks to you," Marcus replied, surprised by his own boldness. "You never did learn respect," she hissed. "I did that school a favor getting rid of you." "By beating me? By damaging my spine? You were incorrigible. All students need discipline." "What you did wasn't discipline," Marcus said quietly. "It was abuse." "Be careful with such accusations," Ms. Stevens warned. "Richard is a very influential man in the music world. One word from him can close a lot of doors." Before Marcus could respond, a small commotion broke out near the stage door. A familiar voice rose above the murmurs. "I most certainly am on the list. Check again, Eleanor Brooks, guest of participant Marcus Johnson." Marcus hurried over to find Mrs. Brooks arguing with the security guard, Grandma Pearl beside her. "Mrs. Brooks? Grandma? What are you doing here? You think I'd miss this?" Mrs. Brooks demanded. "Not a chance." As the guard verified their credentials, Marcus noticed Ms. Stevens watching the interaction with narrowed eyes. When Mrs. Brooks turned and saw her, the temperature in the backstage area seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Victoria Stevens," Mrs. Brooks said coldly. "Still terrorizing children, I see." Ms. Stevens paled. "Eleanor Brooks. I didn't realize you knew the Johnson family." Small world, Mrs. Brooks replied. Even smaller when it comes to music in this city. I've been Marcus's teacher. You? Miss Stevens looked between them in disbelief. Yes, me. First chair cellist with the Metropolitan Symphony for 30 years. Though you wouldn't know about that, would you? Too busy maintaining your little kingdom of mediocrity to recognize real talent. Miss Stevens sputtered, I should inform Richard. Oh, please do, Mrs. Brooks smiled thinly. Tell him Eleanor Brooks says hello. We have quite a history, Richard and I. Ask him about the time he auditioned for the symphony and was rejected. Twice. I was on the selection committee. As Miss Stevens hurried away, Marcus stared at Mrs. Brooks in awe. You never told me you knew Professor Harrington. Some history is better left buried, Mrs. Brooks replied. Until it becomes useful. Number 17, Marcus Johnson, the coordinator called. You're on deck. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling a curious calm settle over him. His demons were gathering, Miss Stevens, Professor Harrington, his past, his pain, but somehow, their power over him was diminishing. You've got this, Grandma Pearl whispered, straightening his tie. Remember who you are. As he walked toward the stage, cello in hand, Marcus knew he was ready not just to play, but to speak his truth through music. Our next performer is Marcus Johnson, a sophomore at Hillcrest Academy, the announcer's voice echoed through the auditorium. Marcus began studying cello just 6 months ago and will be performing the prelude from Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, followed by an original composition. A murmur swept through the audience at the mention of his brief training. In the front row, Professor Harrington leaned over to whisper something to a fellow judge, who frowned in response. As Marcus walked onto the stage, the spotlights momentarily blinded him. When his vision cleared, he saw hundreds of faces looking back expectantly. In the third row, his mother sat with Lydia, both giving him encouraging smiles. Jamal and Sarah had managed to find seats near the back. And there, to his surprise, was Dr. Carter, watching intently from the side aisle. Marcus carefully positioned his chair, the special one Mrs. Brooks had insisted he bring, and arranged himself with the cello. His back twinged in protest, a sharp reminder of everything that had brought him to this moment. Looking down at the gleaming instrument, Marcus suddenly felt a wave of doubt. What was he doing here? 6 months against competitors who had been playing their whole lives. He glanced up, catching Professor Harrington's smug expression, the look of a man expecting failure, perhaps even hoping for it. Then his eyes found Mrs. Brooks, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. In that simple gesture was everything she had taught him: music isn't just played, it's felt. It isn't just heard, it's experienced. Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, he wasn't in a competition. He was simply in a moment with his cello, ready to share what they had created together. The first notes of Bach's prelude flowed from beneath his fingers, resonant and pure. As he continued, the technical elements he had practiced so diligently became secondary to the emotion flowing through him. Every moment of pain, every slight, every doubt, transformed into something beautiful. The music spoke of struggle but also of triumph, of darkness giving way to light. When the final note of the Bach piece faded, there was a moment of complete silence before applause erupted. But Marcus barely heard it. He was already transitioning to his original composition, a piece he had titled simply, Standing. This was his true voice, raw and unfiltered. It began softly, almost hesitantly, like a child finding his way in an unfamiliar world. Gradually, it built in complexity and confidence, weaving in elements of classical structure with hints of gospel and jazz that reflected his heritage and upbringing. As he played, Marcus felt the pain in his back intensify, but it no longer mattered. The music flowed through him, around him, beyond him. His eyes remained open, but he saw nothing of the auditorium now, only the music itself, taking shape in his mind's eye like a living entity. The piece reached its climax with a passage that required both technical precision and emotional power. Marcus's bow flew across the strings, his fingers finding notes he hadn't consciously memorized but that lived within him. When the final note resonated through the hall, Marcus was breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he had succeeded or failed spectacularly. Then the silence broke. The applause began slowly, then built to a thunderous ovation. People were standing, first his mother and sister, then Jamal and Sarah, then Dr. Carter, and finally the entire audience. All except Professor Harrington, who remained seated, his expression unreadable. As Marcus rose to take his bow, a shaft of pain shot through his back, causing him to stumble slightly. He recovered quickly, but not before a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It was Dr. Carter who reached him first, striding onto the stage to support him. "Are you all right, son?" he asked quietly. "Just my back," Marcus managed through gritted teeth. "I'll be fine." "That was extraordinary," Dr. Carter said. "Truly extraordinary." Backstage, Marcus was surrounded by well-wishers. Competitors who had earlier dismissed him now approached with genuine admiration. Even Jason looked conflicted, hovering at the edges of the group until Elizabeth pulled him away. "You need to sit down," his mother insisted, guiding him to a chair. "Your back is worth it," Marcus finished. "Every twinge, every pain. It was worth it." Mrs. Brooks made her way through the crowd, tears streaming unashamedly down her face. "In 40 years of teaching," she said, embracing him carefully, "I have never been more proud." The judges' deliberation seemed to take forever. When the finalists were finally called back to the stage, Marcus was among them, along with Jason and 3 others. The head judge, a distinguished composer, stepped forward. "Before we announce our decisions, I want to say that the level of talent we witnessed today gives me great hope for the future of classical music." One by one, the special recognitions were announced. 4th place went to a violinist from a performing arts school. 3rd place to a pianist who had performed a challenging Chopin piece. 2nd place, the judge continued, goes to Jason Reynolds from Hillcrest Academy for his performance of Vivaldi's Summer. Jason stepped forward, his smile faltering slightly. He had expected to win. And 1st place, the judge paused dramatically, is awarded to Marcus Johnson, also from Hillcrest Academy, for his groundbreaking interpretation of Bach and his original composition, which the judges found both technically impressive and emotionally transcendent. The auditorium erupted once more. Marcus, stunned, barely registered Dr. Carter guiding him forward to accept the crystal trophy and scholarship certificate. Through tears of joy, Marcus caught sight of Professor Harrington's face, a mask of disbelief and barely controlled anger. For a moment, their eyes met across the stage. But in that moment, Marcus realized something important: he no longer cared what Professor Harrington thought. The man's approval or disapproval had become irrelevant. The music was what mattered. The truth was what mattered. And his truth had finally been heard. The Monday after the showcase, Marcus returned to Hillcrest Academy to find the atmosphere had changed. Students who had previously ignored him now nodded in recognition. Teachers who had been indifferent suddenly showed interest in his progress. News of his victory had spread quickly, amplified by a feature in the local newspaper with the headline, "Musical Prodigy Emerges from Unlikely Circumstances." Professor Harrington, however, was noticeably absent. The substitute teacher explained he had taken a personal day. During lunch, Sarah found Marcus in the courtyard. "Have you heard?" she asked, breathless with excitement. "There's an emergency school board meeting tonight. About Professor Harrington and Ms. Stevens." "What about them?" Marcus asked. "After your performance, Dr. Carter started asking questions about your back injury. When he heard the full story, he contacted some colleagues on the school board. Apparently, there were other complaints about both teachers that were previously ignored." That evening, Marcus's mother received a call requesting their presence at the meeting. They arrived to find the board room packed with parents, students, and faculty. Dr. Carter greeted them at the door. "Marcus, Dr. Johnson, thank you for coming. This won't be easy, but it's necessary." The board chair, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, called the meeting to order. "We're here to address serious allegations against 2 faculty members, Professor Richard Harrington of Hillcrest Academy and Ms. Victoria Stevens, currently at Lakeside Elementary but previously employed at Westside High School. For the next hour, Marcus listened as student after student, current and former, came forward with stories of humiliation, discrimination, and in Ms. Stevens's case, physical abuse. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he approached the microphone with steady resolve. "I came to Hillcrest because I love music and wanted a better education," he began. "What I found was a system that wasn't designed for students like me to succeed. But what happened in Professor Harrington's classroom or with Ms. Stevens at Westside isn't just about me. It's about every student who was made to feel they don't belong, that their voice doesn't matter." By the end of the evening, the board had reached a decision. Both teachers would be suspended pending a full investigation. Additionally, Hillcrest Academy would implement new training programs on inclusive teaching methods and proper discipline. As they were leaving, Marcus spotted Professor Harrington in the parking lot, looking diminished without his usual classroom authority. "Mr. Johnson," the professor called, approaching hesitantly. "A word?" Marcus paused, his mother tensing beside him. "I misjudged you," Harrington admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. "Your performance at the showcase was impressive." "Thank you," Marcus replied simply. "I've taught music for 30 years, Harrington continued. "I've never." He trailed off, seeming lost for words. "I never imagined someone could progress so quickly. Especially." He stopped himself. "Especially someone like me?" Marcus finished for him. Harrington had the grace to look ashamed. "I made assumptions I shouldn't have. About who belongs in classical music. About what talent looks like." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was something. A crack in the wall of prejudice. A beginning. 2 weeks later, Marcus gave his first solo recital at the community music school where Ms. Williams taught. The small auditorium was filled beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls. Before playing, Marcus addressed the audience. "Music has the power to heal, to connect, to transform. Sometimes the greatest obstacles become our greatest strengths. My back injury could have ended my musical journey before it began. Instead, it became part of my story, part of the emotion I bring to every note." He played for nearly an hour, Bach, Vivaldi, and several of his own compositions. Though his back still troubled him, requiring him to use his special chair and take brief pauses between pieces, the pain no longer defined him. Among the audience were executives from a major record label, invited by Dr. Carter. After the performance, they approached with an unexpected offer. They wanted to feature Marcus in a documentary about young classical musicians breaking barriers. As spring turned to summer, changes continued. The investigation into Ms. Stevens revealed a pattern of abuse spanning years, resulting in her teaching license being revoked. Professor Harrington, while keeping his position, was required to complete extensive retraining and to work under supervision. Hillcrest Academy established a new scholarship program aimed specifically at talented students from underprivileged backgrounds, with Marcus asked to serve on the selection committee. On the last day of school, Marcus received a letter from the Eastman School of Music, confirming his place in Dr. Carter's summer program. Included was a note in Dr. Carter's handwriting: "Your music speaks truths that need to be heard. This is just the beginning." That evening, Marcus visited Mrs. Brooks, bringing her a bouquet of flowers and a framed program from his recital. "I'm so proud of you," she said, embracing him. "Not just for your playing, but for who you've become." "I wouldn't be here without you," Marcus replied. "You saw something in me even I didn't see." "No," Mrs. Brooks corrected gently. "I just helped you see what was already there." As Marcus practiced that night, his fingers dancing across the strings of Mrs. Brooks's Guadagnini cello, now on permanent loan to him, he reflected on how far he had come. The pain in his back would likely always be with him, a reminder of past injustice. But it had also led him to discover his true voice, his purpose. In the resonant notes that filled his room, Marcus heard not just music but possibility. A future where barriers continued to fall, where art transcended prejudice, where his story might help others find their own voice. And that, he realized, was the most beautiful composition of all. Dear friend, music belongs to everyone, regardless of background, race, or circumstances. This story reminds us that talent can emerge from anywhere when given opportunity and support. No child should face discrimination or abuse in educational settings, yet many do every day. Through characters like Marcus, we can recognize the resilience of the human spirit and our responsibility to stand against injustice. Your likes and subscriptions help us continue sharing these important messages of hope and transformation. Together, we can build a world where every child's gifts are nurtured, not suppressed. Subscribe now to join our community of changemakers.